Voilà.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you recording? Hold on. Ready when you are.
For this debate, the topic we will be discussing is, can you listen to music separate from its original meaning? On the for party is to my left, and the against party is to my right. So to start this debate, we're going to start with the for party.
We think you can listen to music without being influenced by the original meaning. Peter Kiley, for instance, says you can't attach emotions to something that isn't a sentient being, meaning that music is in the eye of the interpreter or listener, as it were, and whatever beliefs or emotions put forward by the composer aren't necessarily reciprocated by the listener. And if music by itself is judged by the listener's interpretation.
Yeah, well, I think there is some truth in what Peter Kiley says, although after reading Colin Bradford's Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism, he himself actually goes against his own theories, and he agrees with Colin. And he says that when someone is actually moved by music, that there's no scientific or empirical evidence to say that the encoded message within, say, a happy, upbeat song is actually making them feel them emotions, and therefore the encoded message is being conveyed to the decoder or recipient.
Yeah, that's
Recipient, yeah.
Does that tie into what you was going to say about Wagner and his Nazi propaganda?
Yeah.
You could say that. What I'd say about Wagner's work is Hitler used Wagner's very anti-Jewish pieces of work and things, as an ideological vehicle for his rise, because of the anti-Semitic values in Wagner's work. It could, however, be said that it's kind of perceived differently, because it's not originally what Wagner intended to do.
Counterpoint what you say about Hitler being completely influenced by Wagner, because in one of his essays, Wagner actually states that he stands opposed to any actual military action in regards to German supremacy. So in that case, Hitler took Wagner's work and completely imposed his own meaning on it by using it to encourage military action. So showing that even what appears to be taking the original meaning of work is actually not. It's, even if it's something as simple as that, you can still take it to a different meaning.
As a kind of contrast the argument to that, I've got a quote from Gottfried Wagner, which is his great grandson actually, and he published this in 1993, and he says that Wagner himself misused music as a vehicle for propaganda, so that his grandson actually thinks that he did use his his compositions to portray anti-Semitic views.
However, even though Wagner himself as a composer did have anti-Semitic views, that doesn't necessarily mean that his music is specifically anti-Semitic. And we can view that as, and again, any way the listener will, that even though Wagner has these beliefs, that won't necessarily come across in all of his music, and that's not necessarily what he himself is portraying.
Yeah, in Wagner's work, you said that it portrays Norse Scandinavian ideology, and that's very apparent in his work.
Yeah, in his operas, there's a lot of, he uses kind of Teutonic tales and folk lore, I want to say, and yeah, he actually portrays kind of anti-Semitic views in there by giving the Jewish roles, saying in tritones and awkward kind of intervals. So it gives them a less dominant and an inferior to their Teutonic other colleagues as well, yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys think that with these messages being so apparent in the music that you can not interpret it as Wagner intended?
That's a point that you can maybe accept that, yeah. But you've got to bear in mind that to a modern listener, during the actual operas themselves, Wagner or the libretto never actually specifically states that those characters are meant to be representative of Jewish stereotypes. So to modern listeners, it could be anything, especially bearing in mind through music being used in popular culture like films and advertising and such like. A lot of things like that lose their original meaning because they become associated with something completely different.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'd like to kind of propose another idea as well. That I've got a quote from, his name's August Kubitschek, and he actually published a book saying The Young Hitler I Knew in 1953. And he actually attended a Wagner opera, Rienzi, in 1905 with Hitler. And he basically accounted the whole night and saying that after his rhythmic speech patterns all changed and that he was a changed man after seeing that. So could you say an extension that after seeing this Wagner opera that possibly his anti-Semitic views maybe enhanced Hitler and that's the Hitler we kind of know today?
But can you say that's true for everyone who listens to that opera?
No.
Or was that?
Which kind of brings me on to the next point about Stuart Hall's encoded and decoded, where you can fit everybody into 3 different areas of listening. And there's 3 different types of decoding basically. He says the dominant decoder fully accepts the encoded message and he reproduces it to others, which I was getting about Hitler maybe. And there's a negotiating decoder where he fully accepts the intended code, but there's a level of resistance which reflects their own social situations, which is what you said. And then there's an oppositional decoder where they reject the intended code to their own social situations. So, for example, kind of watching a political broadcast from the opposing party which you vote for, which I think, to summarise, we can all kind of fit into these 3 different categories.
However, Stuart Hall also states that music is lost in translation. And going by that, we can say how the composer, whatever the composer portrays in the music, isn't necessarily what the performer will portray, and in turn what the listener interprets as a result of that.
Yeah, I think a good contemporary example of this is modern day advertising, how music is used to promote different products. The 4-part, how do you think music is interpreted in contemporary advertising?
Contemporary advertising especially is very prone to taking a piece of music and sticking it in a completely different context to what it was originally written for, which, thus stripping it of any meaning. One example would be, if anyone's seen some O2 adverts lately featuring the Dies Irae from Mozart's Requiem, and using it in, which originally it's a piece written kind of expressing anger at the idea of oncoming death and all that stuff. And it's used kind of, to illustrate a cat running around pretending to be a dog. It's completely taking it out of context and giving it a new meaning to anyone who discovers it through that medium.
I would agree with that, about the adverts losing the true meaning of the song. However, you could say that some adverts, just some, are manipulated by companies, by the company's desires, to hold part of the originality back in it. I only have one example of this, and this is probably Christmas songs and Christmas adverts. You'll only find the Christmas songs on the Christmas adverts at Christmas, and that's where you could say like that is where the originality still stays there. Yeah.
jump from Wagner to adverts more for me, please? Any one of you? I'm not focusing on one person there, that's for all of you to do. Because I can see what you're doing, but you need to express that.
Well, because Wagner uses kind of propaganda, I think what we was trying to get at is that possibly companies such as Tesco's and that kind of harness some sort of relevant propaganda, e.g. like encoded messages within Christmas songs, and harness them towards increasing sales, and yeah, that's what I think we was trying to get at.
So you're looking at propaganda being used for a particular agenda to affect a particular outcome.
Yeah.
And so that was your link between the Wagner example and the advertising.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Great. Thanks very much. Come around, please.
Yeah, lots. Stuart Hall, encoding, decoding. Yes, there can be these different readings of a message, but is the inference here, I guess this is aimed more at you, but we both talked about this a bit, is the inference here that while we can decide how we want to respond to a meaning, we're still aware of what that meaning should be?
Yeah.
Is that what you're suggesting? I mean,
Yeah.
are we still always aware, cognizant of what the sender wants us to get out of the
Yeah,
message?
We're kind of back at the blurred lines example,
Yeah.
actually, aren't we, with that?
Yeah, like the recipient is kind of always aware of the encoded message, but then they can reject it due to their own social situations. I think that's what I was trying
I
to say.
disagree. For
Okay,
instance, in the context of advertisements, you very often get songs that have been covered or placed in a way that has no resemblance to the original meaning whatsoever.
How can that happen? Can you think of a practical example? I mean, I've got in my head a particular advert, which won't be one that probably is in your heads, but how can say within a minute-long advert for Tesco's or whatever, or whatever it is, John Lewis, how can that original meaning that was attached to the song that comes from the author, how can it be bastardised in such a way? I mean, formally, I'm kind of thinking about the way in which it's presented to a new audience.
Because it's sneaky, it comes, because advertising's just always there, hidden underneath everything else. Like, whatever you're watching, apart from on BBC, you're always going to have ads. You're going to sit through, and even if you don't notice that you're paying attention to it, it's going to be coming in, it's just infiltrating into your mind, and you're just going to get used to that idea, and that's just going to become its meaning.
Yeah, okay.
So basically what you could say is that you can try attempt to resist the encoded original meaning as much as you like, but at some point you're going to start to give in. Do you see what I mean? Because if we are that bombarded by advertising and that level of propaganda to some degree, at some stage we're just going to stop resisting. And we're just going to kind of let them do their thing. I think it's very interesting that you've, sorry to kind of steal your point, but I think it's very interesting that you kind of set this up with Wagner. And I think the real key thing here was not just his friend that he went to the Wagner operas with, but his great-grandson.
Yeah, yeah.
And also the fact that we do know that he did characterise through leitmotif, using tritones and bestow them upon a particular type of character that was the complete antithesis of the Teutonic hero.
Yeah.
And I do find that very telling. And I think whilst I absolutely agree with what you're saying, if Peter Kivey is absolutely crucial to this argument, I think it's quite difficult to some degree to ignore the points that have been made there.
Can I ask a question around that? Again, kind of Kellen and Eli talked about modern listeners almost dehistoricized from the original set of meanings. Is it immoral or amoral to listen to something that might be so politically charged as